pretty overwhelmed by it. It's also been rather wonderful to see some early photographs which I had no idea Yami had stored away, or that you'd managed to get your hands on. Not really knowing what was going to happen this evening, I was somewhat challenged on what actually to talk about. And when Rodrigo suggested 5 decades of palm research, it didn't really sink in immediately, but in fact, I've been at it for 5 decades, more or less. So what I've tried to do is to summarize certain aspects of at least palm systematics, what has gone on over the last 50 years. And I'm afraid that some of the images may duplicate what you've seen already. No, I'm obviously not doing the right thing. Is it that way around? No, okay. Yeah. In the 1960s, there were really rather few palm systematists making significant contributions. Of course, the great danger of this sort of talk is to offend by omission. My apologies if I had not mentioned particular people. Barry Tomlinson had done a survey of palm anatomy. Furtado was coming to the end of his career in Singapore and was working on the genus Hyphini, having managed to get a sabbatical year in Coimbra in Portugal. Wesselsberg was working in Suriname, taught his PhD. Sidney Glassman working in Chicago on Caucasoid palms. Robert Reed on Thrynax under Harold Moore, and preeminently Harold Moore and Natalie Yule in Cornell. As for the resources that we had at our disposal to work on palms, we have the account of the whole family of Potsdam in 1964, which was based on Barrett's work. The monographs of Calamoid and Coryphoid palms by Beccari, highly condensed and difficult to use book because it was in Italian, and the synopsis of Ricoid palms by Beccari and Pichi Simoli. Beccari had died in 1922 before this was published, and Pichi Simoli brought it to publication, a very important paper nevertheless. Many papers by Liberty Hyde Bailey and Gentes Herbarum, the Anatomy of Monocots by Palms by Tomlinson, and for the amateur, a book which I'm sometimes horrified to see is still used, Palms of the World by James McCurrock. Onto this scene blazed Corner in 1966, publishing The Natural History of Palms, a book which he announced when I was in my final year in Cambridge. He had just published. He wasn't going to give any lectures on palms, but there would be questions in the exams at the end of the year, and if we were interested, we better buy the book and read it. So I duly did, and it provided an inspiring but rather quirky introduction to the palm family. It was heavily criticized by Harold Moore, who unusually at that time reviewed it in Nature. He also reviewed it in Principles. Corner had been a staff member of the Singapore Botanic Gardens from 1929 until the end of the Japanese occupation, and he subsequently became a professor of botany in Cambridge University. And his contribution to palm botany lies in his palm collections, which are not very extensive, and his book. There was no other major research. He was a highly idiosyncratic and inspiring teacher. And he's commemorated in the palm genus Cornera, which I sank into Calamus, and in Leptocomiopsis Corneri and Calamus Corneri. And I cannot bear to read the book any longer, so full of quirky things which I find were so difficult to justify, and so on. Nevertheless, it inspired me to begin my research on palms, and it also inspired a lot of people of my generation to look at palms more carefully. And I have also to say that there is no book like it since. there have been attempts to summarize aspects of palm natural history and ecology, but have never come anywhere near the scope of Corner's book. I went to Corner in my final year and said I wanted to work on palms, and he dreamt up a research project on the genera Johannes Tasmania and Ugasona, two completely unrelated palms, and these days I would be horrified to give this sort of subject to a research student beginning their PhD. But it proved to be an unusual but very productive introduction to palm morphology. Johannes Tasmania asking the question of what is the difference between a palmate leaf and a pinnate leaf, with its very interesting structure, and the floral and fruit morphology of Ugasona was really extraordinary. It had been suggested by Beccari to be intermediate between caucasoid palms and lepidocaryoid palms. The story of Ugasona and its relationships has taken a long time to become clearer, and I had relatively little input into the final decision on where it actually belongs. After I graduated my PhD, I went to Indonesia to work for 4 years, as Bill has described, and I concentrated on rattlings. This amazing job. I was told to go out to Indonesia on a relatively handsome starting salary as a new graduate, a new PhD, and told to collaborate with the Indonesians in developing their biological program. That was my remit. So when I arrived in Bogor, I was expecting to be told what to do. And what I was told to do by the keeper of the herbarium was choose a group of palms of economic significance and work on them. And I chose rattans. It was at this time that I started a correspondence with Hal Moore. And Hal was the most amazing correspondent, and I'll come on to that a bit later. This was also a period of supplemental stress because Corner visited Indonesia in 1972 and found much not to his liking, and left early in high dudgeon and never spoke to me again. So the correspondence with people like Harold Moore became increasingly important to keep me sane. Hal was undoubtedly the most important and influential scholar of palms in the latter half of the 20th century, based in the Bailey Hortorium from 1948 until he died in 1980. There already was a tradition of palm research in Cornell, started by Liberty Hyde Bailey, and many of the classic papers on palms published in Gente Sabana. And Hal continued, expanded, intensified Bailey's work. His main interests were palms at the generic level, how to group them to reflect perceived relationships, and then also particular floras, and palm floras of the Mascarene Islands, Fiji, and especially New Caledonia came to dominate his floristic research in the later part of his life. How targeted fieldwork in areas of the world with polynomial palm genera, in all spending 5 years on and off in the field. His aim was to assemble material for describing and assessing genera. We've already heard how he worked with Natalie on this. He saw and collected all but 18 palm genera in the wild, earning him membership of the Explorers Club, the American Club, for having seen this, and all but 18 is pretty good going, I think. Unfortunately, his favourite destination was undoubtedly New Caledonia, and he once said to me that when he retired, he might actually consider going to live in New Caledonia. Unfortunately, during that period, Madagascar was extremely difficult to access. There was a Christian Marxist government that was extremely xenophobic, and it was virtually impossible for foreign researchers to go to Madagascar to work. So the aspects of Hal's palm generic work that was least developed was probably related to the Madagascar palms. But his fieldwork exploits were written up in highly entertaining travelogues in Principes, And the criticisms that Hal made of Corner's book, people came back to Hal and said that the problem with Hal Moore was that he could only write scholarly texts and dry texts that were not inspiring. How wrong that was. His travelogues in Principes are wonderfully entertaining. And his fieldwork prompted more interest in palms wherever he went. And I think this is particularly the case in New Guinea, where there are whole suites of beautiful material collected by the collectors working for the New Guinea Forest Department, inspired by Hal Moore's visits to New Guinea. He visited Colombia several times, and he elucidated Ceroxylon alpinum and Quindíoense, which had been completely confused at the time, I believe. I joined him in 1976 for a few weeks, and this was my first trip to Colombia. This is my second now. The aim was to collect material at Huetinha campus to see whether it was truly distinct from Huetinha, and to look for Cabrera, a Pulinone genus from the northern part of the Choco, now included in Geonoma triandra. And this is Huetinha campus vesicularis, on the pass over to Buenaventura, and Huetinha castanica. Hal also had major herbarium visits, which he spent in Europe, photographing herbarium specimens. He spent a particularly long time in Florence, and you can see his labels, often with a little scale bar attached to it, and frequently with fingerprints, which I could swear are Hal's, in the dust accumulating on the wonderful specimens in Florence. Then, as we've heard, Natalie joined Hal, working as a plant anatomist morphologist, carrying out exemplary studies, particularly into inflorescence structure and floral morphology, and her work with Hal underpinned the decisions that they made together for grouping genera. And most important, to my way of thinking, was the elucidation of the triads in auricular palms and the acervulus and cameridorioid palms, and going on from that to look at the whole business of how palm inflorescences are built up and arranged. The results of much of this work was published in this important paper, which is a precursor to Genera Palmari, the major groups of palms and their distribution. 212 genera recognized, grouped into 15 major groups, not given formal taxonomic rank, and further organized into 5 suggested lines of evolution. Succinct diagnoses, this is not bedtime reading, it's very concentrated. And all genera placed within groups, no generic descriptions, etc., etc. It was a fantastic framework for organizing herbaria. Q herbarium was not organized alphabetically, it was used a modified Lentherman-Hooker arrangement of genera. I sought permission to reorganize the palms, which I then did, based on this paper, Major Groups of Palms, which meant that palms which still to this day are generally recognized as being related to each other are actually found near to each other in the herbarium. The 5 evolutionary lines are Cryphoid, Lepidocaryoid, Nepoid, Karyotoid, and Auricoid line. The perceptions of palm evolution were much influenced by general pre-cladistic, pre-molecular concepts of monocoty evolution along the lines of apocarpias and ancestral condition. Hermaphrodism is ancestral to Monoecious and Dioecious, and perceived ancestral characters are concentrated in the Cryphoid lines. But of course, nowadays we view this very differently. And as has been mentioned, Hal played a very important role in the Palm Society. He was a founding editor of Principes, now Palms. He strove to strike a balance between accessibility, scientific accuracy, presenting a wonderful eclectic mix of articles covering many aspects of palms. and he authored many articles from monographs to entertaining travelogues. And under his editorship, this journal became the most important source of general information on the Palm family. The journal continues, all issues available online, and we are short of articles. Please consider publishing in Palms. Hal had two Palm taxonomy students, Robert Reed, who worked on Pseudophoenix and Thrinax, and Fred Essig worked on Tachysperma and eventually Synopses and several population genera, and went on to do palm fruit anatomy. Hal's relationships with other palm researchers of his generation is quite interesting. Most palm research at the time benefited from a very close links with Halmore and his, or complemented what he and his team were working on. Sidney Glassman, working on Caucasoid palms in Chicago, seems to be very much on his own. And I've seen correspondence between him and Hal where they had diametrically opposed views on generic delimitation within the Caucasoids. And it's interesting how, after Hal's death, and Natalie and I started working towards genera palmarum, we gradually worked towards the position that we could recognize the splits within the genus Cyagrus, and you'll probably see in the first edition of GP that we included Rhyticocos barbosa, Aricuriola, Aricastra, etc. in Cyagrus, but we didn't go the whole hog. And it's interesting to see Sidney Glassman, well and truly vindicated by a recent paper where the last of the non-Cyagrus genera has gone into Cyagrus in the transfer of Lytocarium into Cyagrus based on molecular work. Then Hal died. It was very shocking because we lost a mentor and a very close friend, all people who were associated with Hal. And I was invited by David Bates to visit Cornell in December 1980 to discuss with him and Natalie how genera palmarum would be completed. Natalie and I spent a week going through the papers, Hal's papers, to see what the job would be involved. You know, one level, a great deal of research had been accomplished. About 2/3 of the genera had already been illustrated, but what was clear was there was not a single genus written up as in a state that could be used for publication. And Natalie and I felt challenged. We wanted to do this, we wanted to work on this, but I think we were both rather frightened to tell our bosses back in the Bailey Auditorium and EQ just what a big commitment this was going to be. Initially we thought it would be 3 years, and it's one of Marion Sheehan's beautiful plates that was already ready at the time. Funding came from National Science Foundation, Kew International Park Site in the Bailey Auditorium. Initially 3 years, beginning in 1981, but we had to go back to NSF twice for further funding. And eventually the manuscript was ready in 1986 to go to press, and I can remember reading proofs in a tent in Madagascar by candlelight and realizing there was something wrong with my eyes, and that's when I started wearing glasses. This working on genera palmarum was the most fantastic experience because it allowed us to reassess genera. It was an exciting time for the discovery of new palms and the delimitation of new genera. Several genera became realigned because more material became available. And there was a nice example of Syndra, Aurania, and Halmuria. Aurania, a genus in Southeast Asia from Thailand all the way through to New Guinea. Syndra, a Malagasy genus, only known in Madagascar. And Hal had been very impressed by the similarity in seedlings between Aurania and Syndra, and had suggested that they might be very closely related. And we, Natalie and I, as we worked towards genera palmarum, drawing up the description of Aurania, realized that Syndra couldn't be recognized at the generic level, and so we sank it into Aurania. But there was one group of specimens from Madagascar which were very distinctive in floral morphology and in inflorescence structure. And on the basis of this, we rather hastily erected the genus Halmuria. Very sad to say that this had to be sunk as more material Aurania came from Madagascar. I really regret that. This is Halmuria trispatha, now Aurania trispatha from Madagascar. But even more exciting was the material of Aurania appendiculata from Queensland, described by Domin in Beccaria Piquismolly. They suggested that this was a little bit uncomfortable in Aurania, but the material was appalling. And the Q material of Aurania appendiculata you can see on the right. And I can remember this amazing Sunday morning in Cornell University when I got fresh material of Aurania appendiculata out of the cupboards collected by Humboldt and started looking at it carefully and realizing this couldn't be Aurania, everything was wrong. And why wasn't it a Siroxylon? A wax palm from the Andes. And indeed, what happened then was that I wrote letters to Tony Irvine in Australia, a natural historian who worked out of Atherton, and said, could you go and look at Aurania appendiculata and count the number of bracts in the inflorescence? Are there 2 or are there more? And can you see if it's dioecious or monoecious? Aurania is monoecious. And these are the days before email. I waited 3 weeks and got a letter back from him saying, there are only 2 bracts in the inflorescence, and it's monoecious. And I go, I don't believe the word of it. And then a week later, I got another letter from him saying, hey, I'm wrong. There are 5 bracts in the inflorescence, and it is dioecious. And indeed, it's a Siroxylone palm. Here is the staminate inflorescence of Auraniopsis appendiculata. And of course, this brings this wonderful distribution pattern of Gondwani Vicarius, also we thought in the first edition of General Palmarin, with Juania on Juan Fernandez, Siroxylon in the Andes, Ravinia and Luvilia at the time, Luvilia now sunk in Madagascar and the Comores, and this tiny little black blob in Queensland. Then later on, Philip Trinell, doing very careful work, had to develop a completely different phytogeographic explanation of the distribution of this amazing group of palms. That Auraniopsis was undoubtedly one of the most exciting things that came out of GP. Then there were fragments of a funny little palm from China in Q with a reduplicate fan leaf. Fan leaves, coryphoid palms have induplicate leaves. This had a reduplicate one. It took a long time to get good material of this, but before I saw good material of it, 2 Chinese botanists in Guilin described a new species of Trachycarpus as Trachycarpus gyrata, and I realized that was this palm. Cannot be Trachycarpus. The flowers aren't right, and it's a reduplicate leaf as well. In '84, I had a really exciting visit to China and met the 2 botanists, and we sat down in Guilin and wrote the description of the new genus Quihaya. And most excitingly, recently, the issue from China has discovered the 3rd species, yes, of Quihaya. These are palms restricted to karst limestone, very difficult to get access to. Have such a mixture of different sorts of leaves, both induplicate and reduplicate, to our way of thinking, de-emphasize the importance of leaf vernation, the arrangement of the splitting in the palm leaf as a fundamental taxonomic character. And on the basis of this, we suggested that caryatoid palms, which were induplicate pinnate or bipinnate palms, were probably not associated as their own group or with the coryphoids, but with the ericoid palms, where we included them, and how wrong we were, as subsequent research showed. Another really thrilling discovery was the genus Caryodoxa. I'm probably running out of time, and dinner beckons, so I better rush through this. This wonderful genus, discovered through detective work in Kew in the old archives, refound 50 years after it was first collected, and a spectacular palm, and now in the Quindío Fidecy. It's one of the most ornamental of all Asiatic palms. Of course, I couldn't refrain from meddling with the generic relationships of rattans, and two particular rattans in particular were most peculiar. One of them had already been described as a species of Daemonerops sina, and another one was completely new, had never been collected, and I continued to find it scattered throughout Borneo, where it's endemic. And on the basis of the material I collected, I described two new genera, Polymyrtium and Mutis beta. And sad to say, they have recently been sunk into canvas. But it doesn't get away from the fact that they're really very entertaining rattans. Poorly known genera at the time of writing GP2, there were still several genera represented by fragmentary material. And 10 years later, all had been rediscovered and introduced into cultivation. And many have become familiar ornamentals. Masuala, I'll go over quickly. Beccaria phoenix this is a really curious story. Beccari posthumously in that famous paper in 1955 placed the genus as an anomalous member of the Ericoid tribe Tachyspermii, suggesting it might be intermediate between the Ericoids and Coccozoids. Moore put it in the major groups in his own alliance next to Masuala. Léon Croissant most remarkably suggested it was a Coccozoid palm. Diet gave no evidence why, and I have no evidence at all that he ever saw any material that it might be a Coccozoid, possibly suited to his biogeographical speculations, and so he accepted it as such. As GP1 was getting ready for press, we found uncurated specimens in Paris which clearly showed endocarps with 3 eyes, and that this was indeed a Coccozoid palm. And then, in Madagascar, on that first trip I made in '86, we got supreme, beautiful new material. And this is growing at the site locality, the wonderful torpedo-shaped, unopened inflorescences of Beccaria phoenix. Sommiaria was a genus known at the time only from its type specimens and 1 or 2 extra herbarium specimens in Leighton. And the plate for GP1 was drawn from dried material from borrowed specimens. We knew almost nothing about this genus. And impressed by the superficial similarities with Heterospathe, we placed Sommiaria in Iguanurae, which was a sort of backhanded piece of, stupidity. This has got corky-watered fruits, but corky-watered fruits are found scattered throughout the palm family and showing substantial homoplasia. It has generally undivided leaf, often undivided leaf, which is pure white on the undersurface. It looks incredibly like the genus Pelagodoxa. Why on earth didn't we see the similarities? I have no idea. Both Pelagodoxa and Sommiaria ended up in the Iguanurae in GP1, but now their position is very different. Quindío phoenix, scarcely known outside China in the 1970s, handful of herbarium specimens, and as China opened up to scientific collaboration, we got beautiful spirit preserved material, and the extraordinary inflorescence structure was elucidated. And this is the plate from GP1. And Carpoxylon, there's another funny story. Early 1980s, the genus was only known from a drawing of the fruit and the seed in the original publication, included in GP1 without a drawing as Ericiines placidus. To my shame, Scott's owner, on a visit to London, nipped down the road to the Natural History Museum and found the original fruit in the Natural History Herbarium, a short tube ride from Kew, and I never bothered to go looking for it then, and I'm ashamed. Then John Darrell rediscovered the palm in Vanuatu, introducing it to cultivation. It's now a widespread ornamental in many tropical gardens. And the interesting conservation story that the harvesting of seed for introduction to horticulture funded its conservation in Vanuatu. In the major groups paper, there was no formal hierarchy published, leaving open the possibility of dividing the family. In fact, Howell was at one point, to me personally, talking about dividing up the palm family into several different families. And you've only to think of the Sciatomini, the gingers, bananas and their relatives. As a palm botanist, we know that the differences between the different palm groups are much greater than between the gingers and the bananas. However, I'm really glad we still have one family. Arranging everything in a linear sequence was very challenging, and we carried this out intuitively based on all the data available to us in those pre-clinistic, pre-molecular days. And then we all know about the publication of GP1. In the end, it ran to 3 printings and over 6,000 copies sold. Unfortunately, GP2 has not done anywhere near so well, because I think GP1 spoiled the market. Since GP1, there's a great surge of interest in palms. I'd better go over things very rapidly, but Barry Tomlinson, in an important paper in the Journal of Ecology, Systematics of Ecology, made a statement that, in his opinion, the palm family in 1979 was the best-known tropical plant family. And I can remember Hal Moore and Atterley's, and mine, of course, because I was part of that clique, our shock horror at this statement. How could Barry Tomlinson say this when there's so many palms in the world, we had no idea what species they were, generic delimitation was not fixed yet, and so on. I think by now we can actually say that the palm family is one of the best known tropical families. Molecular data begin to appear in the mid-1990s. Soon, many students were using molecular data, increasingly sophisticated techniques to analyze data, etc. And obviously, there was a need for genera palm 1 and 2. And Natalie and I, as we've already heard, invited our colleagues, Connie, Bill, Madeline, and Carl, to join us in compiling the new GP. And the most important meeting was one in Cornell University in 2004, when we sat around a table, hammered, argued our way through to deciding which genera should be recognized and how they should be arranged. And there are continued refinements were made until the MS went to. Now we've already seen that picture. Life since GP2, as with GP1, GP2 has rapidly become out of date. And here's a nice example of the research of Christine Bacon, showing that Livistona was a natural genus, that the genus Saribus had to be resurrected to take account of species from parts of Southeast Asia, based on molecular data, but with some nice morphological characters to go along with it. And then just very briefly, actually I'll go over this. This is over. This was the palm of the century, Tahina spectabilis, found in 2006, announced to the world with great fanfare as the suicide palm, etc., etc. Who would have guessed that just a few years later, the real palm find of the century was to be discovered, Sabinaria magnifica. Yeah. Digital tools. And then, very briefly, new generic names published since 1965, It's interesting to see how many of those have subsequently been sunk into synonymy. And then old generic names that have been resurrected in the last 50 years, one of which is not universally accepted, but clearly in certain parts of the world there's felt to be the need for it. So palm systematics over the last 50 years has been a period of successive approximations as more and more data become effectable. I want to stress the need for utility in all this. We are constructing taxonomies which we want end users to find useful for hanging data on. The ultimate test of our classifications is if they are taken up by other people, by the user group. And finally, I want to thank the organisers of this meeting, who supported my coming here, my colleagues in Kew, my research students and colleagues worldwide, and above all, Natalie, who was without doubt the best person to collaborate with. A wonderful, wonderful person. Great to have an argument with. She'd be very open, and yeah, I can't say enough about my admiration for Natalie. And finally, my wife Yatni, who has always strongly supported my palm work. And thank you all very much